Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another video. So today's video is going to be something pretty important. I wanted to talk about promoting equality in your writing. A very important thing is happening in the world right now. The Black Lives Matter movement that has been front and center for the past couple weeks and should have been front and center a lot earlier and for a lot longer. You know, I've made a video on this which was kind of rambly. I wanted to make a follow-up video. One of the things that's really resonated with me that I've seen people talking about is how like we have to make sure that this stays important beyond the end of the news cycle. When I saw this call of saying like, you know, like this is something that like us white people have to like continue caring about beyond the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, when it's no longer like 90% of what is on our Twitter feeds, like what are we going to be doing? This has to stay relevant. This has to stay a relevant conversation. Promoting your equality in your work is important for all minorities. Like at the moment, we have a great example of a writer who's not promoting equality in their work. J.K. Rowling is not doing that. Before I just post like an unrelated regular writing video, I felt like it was really important to have a writing focused conversation on this topic so we can think about how to make this not a flash in the pan. AuthorTube, and people are noticing this, AuthorTube has been very silent on the matter, and it's almost like white AuthorTube is acting like we're an insular community that's not affected by the outside world. Well, at the same time, we're literally sending stories out into the world, which requires so much care and respect and empathy and thoughtfulness, but yet we're acting like we can just turn our backs on like actual literal human rights violations. As writers, we can't do that. I mean, as people, we can't do that. But as writers, if any of us think that what we do in our craft is just unrelated so we don't have to talk about it, we're thinking wrongly about what it means to be a writer. You know, I'm trying to be equally conscious of not centering the conversation around myself while also making use of the platform that I have to speak out on this topic to what I assume is a primarily white audience, just because AuthorTube is primarily white, or at least if you looked at it, broke down the percentages of views, the most views are going to white creators in AuthorTube. There are a lot of black creators on AuthorTube. There are a lot of people of color making content on AuthorTube, and they don't make up the larger channels. I saw a good list floating around of black creators on AuthorTube, so I will leave that in the description. I'm also going to leave, Tamara Woods made a video called How to Be an Ally on AuthorTube. I think it is an extremely important video, and my friend Rachel also made a video called Dear White AuthorTube that I would say is very important viewing. You know, obviously there are larger systemic things that need to change. We need to tackle things like police brutality and incarceration rates. Like there are so many things that we need to tackle within almost every single social system. So it might seem kind of like, oh, we're just gonna talk about like our writing, but like I think it is important that every single community looks at what they can do within their community. Going back to what I was saying about trying to be conscious of like the fact that I'm white, but also like I have a platform. But I just wanted to say, like, if you're black, if you're a person of color, and I say something and you're like, that's not a good take, you don't need my permission to call me out, like, but I'm gonna say like, please call me out, and I'd be welcome to that. I guess another thing to talk about, like, there are a lot of issues in traditional publishing, racism in traditional publishing, white privilege in traditional publishing. I'm gonna try to find some articles to leave on that. I'm not gonna talk about it in this video because I'm not really involved in traditional publishing at the moment. I've not published, I'm not working in traditional publishing. I feel like I don't have the knowledge, so this is more like 4 things that individual writers can do to promote equality in their work. Basically, in the end, I think this is just about putting more good into the world with our work than bad. As like a final housekeeping thing, I don't want this to be like preachy or condescending. I think this is something that some people took away from my last video, and like that was a flaw and like an oversight, but like I want to be like, when I'm talking about actions that we can take, I'm not trying to say like you all have to do this but not me, like I'm above it. Like this is, if anything, like a self-memo, a memo to myself, things that I want to put active effort into. My first tip is diversify your reading list. Sorry if I keep looking down, I have a lot of notes for this video and I don't want to forget anything. You know, I think reading is choosing to empathize. Reading is a very empathetic thing, but I think it's important and valuable to just look at the books that you've read over the past couple months and ask yourself who you're choosing to listen to, because when you pick up a book, you're kind of saying to the author, I'm choosing to listen to you and I'm choosing to empathize with your words. And if all or primarily of the authors that you've kind of selected to listen to are white, then that might be a problem. But the good thing about that is that it's a very easy problem to solve. So I'm really trying to like think more about that and like be conscious about that. find ways that you can uplift the authors that you support. Supporting Black-owned bookstores is also really, really important in conjunction with supporting Black writers. That's number one. Number two, diversify your educators. Again, like think about who you're choosing and selecting to listen to from an education standpoint as a writer and outside of writing. You know, this is definitely a problem in academic circles. As someone who went through the academic writing sphere and like got a degree in writing and plans to continue down that path, my biggest critique of the academic writing path is that almost all the professors I had were white. And it's just a very like white dominated field. And the unfortunate thing like with academia to think about in that regard is that's a pattern that like will continue, you know, like I know writers who were like, I didn't want to do my MFA at this school because all the professors are white. People of color aren't being welcomed into that space, then they're not going to go on to become professors, and this problem will continue. So yeah, it's the same with reading, like whose voices are you choosing to value and listen to? And I feel safe saying that if you're only getting your education from white writers or white educators, then you're missing out on something really, really important, and that's a problem. Wherever it is that you like to learn, online courses, craft books, whatever, like seek out more diverse educators, seek out Black educators, seek out Indigenous educators, and again, uplift those educators. Let's talk about diversity. Always kind of a hot button issue on authortube. Representation is really, really important. Representation is so powerful. Lack of representation in media is a huge problem, and I think I've seen positive change within the book community with, you know, campaigns like We Need Diverse Books over the past few years. I think that since we have now gotten a little bit farther, not as far as we should have gotten, but a little bit farther in terms of publishing more own voice stories, especially for white writers, I think there are a few things we could think a little more deeply on. The first thing is, I really think that we need to stop bragging about how diverse our books are when they aren't own voices. You don't get a medal for writing diversity. That's not your own. Like, I'm sorry, and I've been here, I've done this, I know I've contributed to this. We can't expect praise for writing about other people's identities just because we're like gifting them representation. I think another thing to really think about is diversity is not a marketing tactic, and I worry, based on how silent white authortube has been over the past few weeks on a very important matter, I worry that for a lot of authortube, it is seen that way. And this might be the spiciest take in this video, but I kind of worry that in the writing community, white writers saying, I have a Black character, I'm not racist, is kind of equivalent to something that white people say in real life, which is like, oh, I have a Black friend, I'm not racist. Like, your characters exempt you from nothing. They certainly don't exempt you from having to do anti-racist work. If you're white and you've ever been a champion for diversity, you've made a video talking about how important diversity is, you've chastised or condescended to other writers for how their work's not diverse enough, or you've humble bragged about how diverse your writing is, but you haven't spoken up on Black Lives Matter, donated, petitioned, protested, and made efforts to educate yourself. If you haven't done as much as you can in the past couple weeks, but yet you've been this big diversity champion, I'm sorry, but like, I don't make the rules, but maybe you should go do those things and you should rethink. If you've been such a huge champion for diversity, awesome, but apply that same passion to real people and real issues. You know, from like an LGBT perspective, different obviously, but like I know what it feels like to basically never see myself represented, to kind of have felt the repercussions of having never seen myself represented, and also like the few times I have, it's like, it's so precious and it's so meaningful. I know the positive impact that that can have on a person, but before we keep just championing for diversity by just kind of blindly screaming diversity is important, I think there are a few questions that maybe we could be asking ourselves, such as, do I expect praise for writing this character or giving a voice to this community when it's not my own? Again, when I'm talking about representation here, I'm talking about non-own voices rep. I'm not talking about own voices rep. Have I interrogated my own biases to the point that I'm able to write this character respectfully? Am I going to be completely open to feedback? And have I read own voice stories from this perspective? If not, why am I trying to speak before listening? And also, if it's because I can't find these books or they don't exist, is it my place to be the first one to speak for a community? It's probably not. I heard a quote. So a few years ago, I was at a film screening for the film Drunktown's Finest, which is written and directed by Sydney Freeland, who is a trans Navajo screenwriter and director. A Q&A session with her after the screening. And someone asked her a question. I don't remember what the question was, but it was about diversity. And she said more, but this is the one thing that really stuck out to me. I've not forgotten it. And she said, before there can be stories about a group written by those outside the group, there need to be stories about that group written from those within the group. You know, we've got to listen before we speak. Try to promote own voice work before promoting your own non-own voice work. Don't make yourself the hero, kind of, is what I'm saying. I have assembled all of this talk about diversity into the 7 R's, which is, in my opinion, 7 questions that we should ask ourselves before writing from a minority identity that is not our own. These are just questions to ask yourself, to think about. They all start with R, which makes me feel like I need to make pamphlets for this or something. These 7 questions are, first of all, respect. Am I paying as much respect to this culture or identity as possible, and is it respectful and my place to write the story? 2 is research. Am I willing to do the research needed to write this character, and how will I do that? 3 is reason. What is my reason for wanting to write this character, and is it self-serving? 4 is reach. Who is my target audience, and what ideas am I perpetuating to them? 5 is realism. Am I portraying this topic in a realistic, human way rather than basing the writing in stereotypes or sensationalism of other people's trauma? 6 is responsibility. Am I willing to take full responsibility if I make a mistake, apologize, learn, and do better? And return. How can I give back to the community that I'm writing about? I do think it's time to think more deeply about diversity rather than just the fact that we need to have representation. There's definitely more to say on this topic. I really welcome conversation on this. The last point that I had here is, again, a little more philosophical. It's apply the empathy you practice in your writing to real life. This is what this whole video stemmed from, because I was thinking about how writing is empathy. Like, that's literally what you're doing when you're writing fiction. You're putting yourself in a character's place, in a character's mind, you're feeling what they feel, and you're writing their story. That's just like pure empathy. And reading is similar. You know, I'll try to find them, but I remember talking about like studies on how like reading fiction makes people more empathetic. You know, we've done all this work practicing empathy as writers, but what good is it if we can't apply it to real life? How can we take all this work we've done to practice empathy through fiction writing and use it to care about real people and real issues? I think that's all that I have to say on this video. This is by no means a closed topic of conversation. I do want to recognize my own lack of perspective and my own privilege in making this, you know, as someone who is white. And again, I'm sure there are other things that can be done. I also really welcome that conversation. I think that this is such an important conversation to be having in our community right now, and it is important to be doing work outside of our community and taking action outside of our community, but in regards to our own little community. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for having this conversation with me. What's my normal outro? If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, except I've had my ask box closed forever, so maybe you can't. And I'll see you in another video.